Welcome back to Janine Reacts. Today we are looking at a group of people you welcomed into your home through your TV screen: actors, reality stars, even a game show winner built entirely on trust and likability. But if you watch closely, you will see exactly when that trusted public image cracked and the real person underneath it took over. I'm going to break down the exact behavior happening on screen, the tells, the tactics, the systems that let it go on. Let's roll the tape.
22. Actors currently rotting in jail you'd never recognize today. Some of these faces once appeared on hit shows, family television, and major Hollywood productions. Today, their names are tied to fraud, violence, abuse, and long prison sentences. A few cases are far more disturbing than the headlines revealed. Stay until the end and subscribe to Classic Hollywood Legends for more stories fame could not hide. Shannon. Guess Richardson. Shannon. Guess Richardson was not a household name, but she had enough screen credits to make the story feel unreal. She appeared in small roles on shows like The Walking Dead and The Vampire Diaries. Then in 2013, her name was suddenly connected to something far darker than any role she had played. Richardson mailed Ricin-laced letters to high-profile public figures, including President Barack Obama, and then New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. At first, she tried to blame her husband, turning the case into a strange mix of celebrity politics and personal deception. But investigators eventually traced the letters back to her. How does someone go from minor television roles to a federal biological weapons case? In court, Richardson pleaded guilty. In 2014, she was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison and ordered to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution. Whatever acting career she once hoped to build was gone. Her case stands out because it was not a Hollywood scandal in the usual sense. It was a federal crime that crossed into national security. Shannon Guess Richardson became famous, but not for her work. She became known for a crime that permanently erased the small career she had started.
Let's get one thing straight right off the bat. This whole list is gonna drive this home over and over. How big someone's career is, it has zero to do with how dark their crimes can get. Shannon Guess Richardson was never a star. She was a background actor. Small parts, blink and you miss her credits, the kind of performer most people couldn't pick out of a lineup. And yet she mailed Ricin-laced letters to the President of the United States and the Mayor of New York City, not one letter. Multiple high-profile targets. This isn't some silly celebrity scandal. This is a federal biological weapons case. The kind of charge that lands you on permanent government watch lists for the rest of your life. Hold up, though, there's one detail the clip blows right past that stopped me cold. She didn't fold immediately. She tried to frame her husband first, built a whole fake narrative to point investigators at him, let them waste time chasing an innocent man while she tried to cover her tracks. That's not just a crime, that's deliberate, calculated cruelty. It adds a layer to this story the headline alone never captures. Think about that for a second. What makes a woman with a handful of minor TV credits decide mailing poison to the most powerful people in the country is a thing she can pull off? This wasn't a snap decision in a fit of rage. It required planning, sourcing, careful execution. A judge handed her 18 years in federal prison for it, but the question of what was going on in her head, it still lingers. It's genuinely unsettling. The clip calls this a national security case, and it is. But what it doesn't say is this: it's also a reminder. You can look completely ordinary, have a totally unremarkable life, and quietly be building something catastrophic right under everyone's nose.
Ryan Grantham. Ryan Grantham's case shocked viewers because his career had been tied to familiar, ordinary screen roles. He appeared in Diary of a Wimpy Kid and later had a small part in Riverdale. To most people, he was just a young actor with a few recognizable credits. Then the story changed completely. In 2020, Grantham killed his mother, Barbara Waite, at their home in British Columbia. He later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. During the case, prosecutors also revealed that he had planned further violence, including a possible attack connected to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, before he eventually turned himself in. What makes a case like this so disturbing is how fast a public image can collapse. In 2022, Grantham was sentenced to life in prison with no chance to apply for parole for 14 years. The court heard about his mental health struggles, but the sentence made clear that the crime itself could not be softened by his age or acting background. There was no comeback, no career reset, and no way to separate his name from the case. Ryan Grantham went from minor Hollywood recognition to a prison sentence that now defines his life far more than any role he ever played.
This one hits different than the first, and I want to break down exactly why. Ryan Grantham killed his mother, that alone is unthinkable, but the part most news stories skip, the part that makes this so much heavier, after he killed her, he loaded his car with weapons, pointed it toward Ottawa, and set out on what prosecutors say was a planned attack on Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He turned himself in before he got there, but the plan existed, it was documented. It was real, that's wild, right? Most coverage just mentions the murder and moves on. But the plan was real, written down, ready to go, so this isn't just a family tragedy. It's a story about someone who, in the hours after taking his own mother's life, immediately moved on to plotting an act of violence that could have shaken an entire country, and then chose to stop. That sequence, murder, mass violence, plot, surrender, barely ever gets the serious discussion it deserves. Everyone fixates on the Diary of a Wimpy Kid connection, obviously. People grew up with that movie, they recognize the face. Seeing that same face tied to a case this brutal feels like a glitch in reality. But that's not the real story. The real story is the severe, unaddressed mental health crisis the court acknowledged, but the public never really sat with. Life in prison, no chance of parole for 14 years. He was barely out of his teens when this happened. He'll be middle-aged before he can even ask a board to consider letting him out. Whatever was breaking inside him before that day, it needed help that never came. That's not an excuse, not even close, but it's a part of this story we can't just ignore.
Zack Avery. Zack Avery was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for running a massive Hollywood Ponzi scheme. His real name was Zachary Horwitz, and while his acting career was small, the fraud tied to his name was huge. He convinced investors that his company was buying film rights and reselling them to major platforms like HBO and Netflix for international distribution. The problem was simple. Prosecutors said those deals did not exist. The contracts were fake. The streaming partnerships were fabricated, and the money from new investors was being used to pay earlier ones. What made this case so bold was how completely he used Hollywood as the costume. Horwitz was not a major studio power player. He played the role of one. He used fake documents, entertainment industry language, and the credibility of famous streaming brands to make the scheme look real. By the time it collapsed, investors had lost hundreds of millions of dollars. In 2021, he pleaded guilty to securities fraud. In 2022, he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison and ordered to pay more than $230 million in restitution. Zack Avery's career did not end because of a bad movie or a failed deal. It ended because the Hollywood story he sold was built on lies.
Now this case, it's a whole different kind of twisted, cause the crime itself was a performance. Zachary Horwitz, he went by Zack Avery for acting work, was never a big name, had a few small credits, barely any real pull in the industry. But he figured out one key thing about how Hollywood looks to people on the outside. If you use the right buzzwords, flash the right letterhead, drop the right names, Netflix, HBO, international distribution rights, people will believe almost anything. It all sounds exactly like the kind of secret, high-return deal only a real insider could get you. So he built a whole persona out of that. He didn't need actual power, he just needed to act like he had it. And he pulled it off so well, he scammed people out of hundreds of millions of dollars before the whole house of cards caved in. $230 million in restitution, 20 years in federal prison. Those are numbers most major studio executives never see tied to their work. His fraud was by far the biggest production of his life, not even close. And the part the clip totally misses, the people he scammed weren't all starry-eyed outsiders with no clue how the business works. Some of them were seasoned investors who'd done entertainment deals for years, which means his act was good enough to fool people who really should have known better. For years, that's not some amateur grift, that's a masterclass in deception wearing a Hollywood costume.
Michael Jace. Michael Jace was sentenced to 40 years to life for killing his wife, April Jace. Before that, many viewers knew him as Julian Lowe, the police officer he played on FX's The Shield. That role made the case even more disturbing for fans because the man once recognized for playing law enforcement ended up at the center of a real murder trial. The crime happened in 2014 at the couple's Los Angeles home. Jace called police himself after the shooting. What followed was not a rumor, not a tabloid misunderstanding, and not a celebrity argument blown out of proportion. It was a domestic violence case that ended with a woman dead and 2 children losing their mother. The hardest part of this story is how ordinary the warning signs can look before everything turns irreversible. In 2016, a jury convicted Jace of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison, ending whatever remained of his acting career. Michael Jace's name is no longer remembered mainly for The Shield. It is remembered because his real life became darker than anything he ever played on television.
The shield was built entirely on moral gray areas, on the ugly gap between the badge cops wear and the things they actually do when no one's watching. Michael Jace played a police officer on that show. He spent years acting out that exact contradiction for a living. Then in 2014, he shot and killed his wife April in their own home while their kids were there. I need to say this plain, cause the clip doesn't lean into it nearly enough. April Jace was a real person, a mother. Her 2 boys were there to see the aftermath of what their father did. They're living with that reality every single day. Most people frame this story around the irony of a cop actor committing murder, but that's just a sidebar. The real center of this story is a woman who lost her life, and 2 kids who lost everything, 40 years to life. He called 911 himself right after it happened. Some people call that odd, but domestic violence experts will tell you it's actually not rare at all. That split second of explosive violence followed immediately by a call that reads almost like surrender. These cases never look the way they do on TV cop dramas. This one is a perfect, devastating example of that. The clip gets one thing exactly right. His real life did become darker than any role he ever played. But I'd add this, the darkest part of it wasn't the end of his career. It was what he did to April. That's the part that should always lead.
Will Hayden. Will Hayden went from reality TV fame to spending the rest of his life in prison. He was best known as the star of Sons of Guns, the Discovery Channel series built around his Louisiana firearms business, Red Jacket Firearms. On television, he was presented as a tough-skilled, larger-than-life shop owner. Off-screen, the truth that came out in court destroyed that image completely. In 2014, Hayden was arrested after serious allegations involving minors surfaced. The case quickly ended the show's run and turned his public name into something much darker than reality TV controversy. By 2017, he had been convicted on multiple sexual offense charges in Louisiana. Reports from the case said the victims were young girls, and the court treated the crimes with the full weight of the law. What makes this case so disturbing is not only the crime, but the mask that fame helped create. In May 2017, Hayden was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 40 years. Later that year, he received another life sentence in a separate case. He is serving his sentence at the Louisiana State Penitentiary and is not expected to leave prison. Will Hayden's fall was not a business mistake or a bad headline. It was the complete collapse of a public persona after crimes that left permanent damage behind.
This case pulls back the curtain on something that pops up again and again on this list, and I want to name it plain. The fake, performative tough guy mask so many reality stars sell on TV. Will Hayden was packaged to Discovery Channel viewers as the ultimate no-nonsense man, firearms expert, business owner, larger-than-life Louisiana personality. Sons of Guns was sold entirely on that vibe, competence, control, unshakable authority, and that exact image. That's the perfect shield to hide terrible behavior behind. When someone is presented to you as strong, capable, fully in charge, your brain doesn't jump to this person is capable of unthinkable harm. The persona does the work for them. Fame doesn't just get you money or access, it gets you unearned trust. It makes people hesitate to believe accusations. It makes investigations move slower than they should, 2 life sentences plus 40 years, then another life sentence on top of that in a separate case. He's locked up in Angola, he's never getting out. Discovery pulled the show the second he was arrested, no hesitation, no second chances. But the question that always lingers with cases like this, how many people around him saw red flags, suspected something was wrong, and said nothing for months or years before the police ever got involved? We almost never get a straight answer to that, and we should.
Allison Mack. Allison Mack pleaded guilty in the NXIVM case, turning her name from Smallville nostalgia into one of Hollywood's most disturbing crime stories. For years, fans knew her as Chloe Sullivan, the smart and loyal friend on a hit superhero series. But behind the familiar television image, Mack had become deeply involved in NXIVM, a group that presented itself as self-improvement while hiding exploitation and control. Prosecutors said Mack helped recruit women into a secret NXIVM subgroup connected to Keith Raniere. The case exposed manipulation, coercion, and abuse of power inside an organization that had used polished language to cover something far darker. What made Mack's fall so unsettling was the contrast between the character people remembered and the role she admitted playing in real life. In 2019, Mack pleaded guilty to racketeering charges. In 2021, she was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Her sentence was shorter than many expected because she cooperated with prosecutors while Raniere received 120 years. Mack was released early in 2023 after serving about 21 months. Her story did not end with a typical celebrity apology or a faded scandal. It became part of a larger warning about influence, blind loyalty, and what can happen when fame is used to pull vulnerable people into something dangerous.
Allison Mack's story, it's one of the messiest, most psychologically tangled on this whole list, and I don't think most people talk about it with the depth it actually needs. Keep this in your head as we go. Allison Mack wasn't just some quiet member of NXIVM. Prosecutors say she was one of the group's top recruiters. She used the exact traits that made people love her as Chloe Sullivan on Smallville: her warmth, her relatability, the easy trust she inspired, to bring women into an organization that exploited them, controlled them, broke them down. The same thing that made her a beloved public figure became a weapon to hurt real people. That's a specific, horrifying kind of abuse. It's not the same as a violent crime committed alone. It weaponizes the parasocial bond fans build with people they watch on screen. The automatic, unearned trust we give to actors who feel like old friends. She used that against people we still don't even have good words to describe how messed up that is. Keith Raniere, the group's leader, got 120 years. Mack got 3, served roughly 21 months after cooperating fully with prosecutors. Whether that sentence matches the harm she caused. People still argue about it, and honestly, it's a fair fight. She was manipulated and broken by NXIVM first, then turned around and manipulated others. Both things are true at the same time. Flattening her into just a villain or just a victim is easier, but it's not honest. What her case really lays bare is how easy it is for ordinary people to get pulled into something unforgivable. Mix vulnerability with a charismatic leader, add a community that cuts you off from everyone outside it, and people will do things they never would have imagined on their own. That's not just a Hollywood problem, that's a human problem.
Drexel. Drexel became one of the most familiar faces on the American Ninja Warrior show. He was strong, focused, and built his reputation on discipline. Fans watched him train, compete, and keep coming back until he finally won Season 11 in 2019, taking home $1 million prize. For a time, he looked like the perfect success story, an athlete who had turned years of hard work into a national triumph. Then everything changed. In 2020, Drexel was arrested in a federal case involving minors. The charges were serious enough to wipe away the image that had made him famous almost overnight. Prosecutors said the case involved child sexual abuse material and illegal conduct involving minors. This wasn't just a bad headline or a career scandal. It became a federal criminal case, completely changing how the public viewed him. What made this downfall so disturbing was that it was a far cry from the image fans had built. In 2023, Drexel pleaded guilty. In 2024, he was sentenced to 121 months in federal prison, followed by 15 years of probation. He was also ordered to restitution to the victim. For years, people cheered Drexel because he seemed to represent strength, focus, and perseverance. Now his name is tied to a crime that has ruined his career and left fans with a much darker reality than what they saw on television.
$1 million prize, a national TV win, a whole persona built on discipline, grit, never giving up, and then federal charges for child sexual abuse material. The Drexler case is one of the most jarring left turns on this entire list, cause the brand he'd built was so thoroughly tied to being a good person. American Ninja Warrior isn't just a sports competition, it's a show about character, about coming back after you fall. About physical and mental strength being proof you're someone worth looking up to. The whole point of the format is that the athletes stand for something admirable. So when the guy who actually won the whole thing, who was held up as the face of everything the show claims to value, gets convicted on charges like these, it doesn't just ruin his name. It makes every viewer question a basic assumption we all make, that we can tell what kind of person someone is by how they perform in front of a camera. 121 months in federal prison, 15 years of probation after that, those are serious numbers for serious crimes. And the victim in this case, there's restitution ordered, so we know a real person suffered real harm, deserves to be the focus of this story, not a footnote in a think piece about a fallen athlete. This is the lesson we keep having to learn over and over, and we still never quite get it. Any performance on screen, athletic, creative, moral, tells you almost nothing about what that person does when the cameras turn off. Almost nothing.
Colin Walker. Colin Walker was starting to build a name in entertainment before his criminal case destroyed everything. He was known as a rapper under the name KR, and he also appeared in films like Superfly and Kings. For a short time, it looked like he might be one of those young performers who could move between music and acting. Then the allegations came forward and the image changed completely. In 2018, Walker was arrested after multiple women accused him of using fake professional opportunities to get close to them. Prosecutors said he contacted aspiring models online offering photo shoots, music videos, or introductions to famous people. Instead, those promises became part of a pattern that led to serious criminal charges. What makes this case so disturbing is how ambition was allegedly used as bait. In 2022, Walker was convicted on multiple felony counts, including sexual assault-related charges involving women and teenage girls. Later that year, he was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. There was no comeback after that. His music, his acting credits, and whatever future he had in Hollywood were buried under the weight of the conviction. Colin Walker's story is not just about a rising performer who fell. It is about how fame, access, and false promises can become tools for real harm. Joe Exotic. Before Tiger King made him a Netflix phenomenon, Joe Exotic was already living in a world built on conflict. He ran a private zoo in Oklahoma, surrounded himself with big cats, cameras, loyal followers, and enemies. His feud with animal rights activist Carole Baskin was not a side story. It became one of the central forces that pulled his life apart. To viewers, Joe looked loud, reckless, and almost unreal. But federal prosecutors were not dealing with a reality TV character. They were dealing with Joseph Maldonado Passage, a man accused of trying to have Baskin killed. In 2019, Joe was convicted in a murder-for-hire case. He was also convicted on multiple wildlife-related charges, including violations involving endangered animals and false records. The image that once made him famous suddenly carried a much heavier meaning. The strange part was not just the crime. It was how quickly the public turned a federal case into entertainment. In 2020, he was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. After resentencing, that term was reduced to 21 years, but the conviction remained. From prison, Joe continued pushing appeals, asking for attention, and seeking a pardon. Joe Exotic did not become famous for talent, music, or conservation. He became famous because his life looked unbelievable on screen and because the crimes behind that talent, music, or conservation. He became famous because his image were real.
Joe Exotic is the clearest example on this list of something really uncomfortable about how we eat up true crime like it's just another show. Tiger King dropped on Netflix in March 2020, right as the whole world locked down. Millions of people binged it in days, and a huge chunk of those viewers walked away thinking Joe was funny, quirky, even sympathetic. There were memes, celebrity tweets demanding a pardon, merch. No way around it, we turned a man who paid to have a woman killed into a pop culture punchline, a Halloween costume, a meme. Carole Baskin, whatever you think of her, whatever the documentary tried to imply, was a real person, a real target of a real murder-for-hire plot. While people were dressing up as Joe for parties, she was living with the fact that someone had handed over cash to end her life. 21 years in federal prison after his sentence was reduced. Multiple wildlife convictions stacked on top of the murder charge. Even from behind bars, he never stopped performing. Pushed for pardons, posted updates, treated his own incarceration like just another season of the show. In a way, that's the most revealing part of the whole story. The line between Joe the man and Joe the character got so blurry, even prison couldn't separate them. What this case really forces us to confront is our own willingness to turn serious, violent crime into entertainment when the guy at the center is charismatic enough. And that willingness has real costs. It warps how we see guilt, how we see victims, how we process what we're actually watching when we hit play on a true crime doc.
Skylar DeLeon. Skylar DeLeon's acting career was brief, but the crime tied to that name became infamous. DeLeon had a small, uncredited connection to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the kind of minor Hollywood credit that would normally disappear into trivia. Instead, it became a disturbing footnote in a murder case. In 2004, DeLeon became involved in the killing of Thomas and Jackie Hawks, a married couple who were trying to sell their yacht. Prosecutors said the plan was driven by money, with DeLeon and others targeting the couple for their boat and assets. What should have been a simple sale turned into a criminal plot that ended 2 lives. The case stood out because the public image was so thin, but the crime was so severe. DeLeon was later convicted of murdering the Hawks and also convicted in another killing connected to the case. In 2009, DeLeon was sentenced to death in California. Co-defendants also received long prison terms, including life sentences. Years later, DeLeon's name still appears in true crime discussions because of the contrast, a tiny entertainment credit on one side and a brutal, calculated crime on the other. It was not fame that made the case unforgettable. It was the coldness of what happened after the cameras were long gone. Paul Tutul Sr. Paul Tutul Sr. built his fame on noise steal and family conflict. As the face of American Chopper, he turned Orange County Choppers into a television brand. Viewers came for the custom motorcycles, but they stayed for the arguments, especially the explosive relationship between Paul Sr. and his son Paul Jr. His case is different from the others on this list. Paul Sr. was not known for a prison sentence or a violent crime. His downfall was more about money lawsuits, bankruptcy, and the slow collapse of the image that made him famous. By 2018, Tutul had filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Reports later connected him to disputes over debts, business obligations, and court issues. For a man once presented as the tough boss of a successful motorcycle empire, the financial problems made the whole brand look much less powerful than it once seemed. What makes his story interesting is how reality TV turned business pressure into entertainment before the real bills came due. Orange County Choppers eventually moved operations to Florida, and Paul Sr. continued trying to keep the brand alive. But the old image had changed. He was no longer just the loud father figure from cable television. He became a reminder that fame can make a business look bigger, stronger, and cleaner than it really is. Zara Fithian. Zara Fithian had the kind of resume many actors spend years chasing. She worked in martial arts, built a screen career, and appeared in Doctor Strange, a Marvel film seen by audiences around the world. To casual viewers, she was a minor action performer with a connection to one of Hollywood's biggest franchises. That image collapsed in a British courtroom. In 2022, Fithian and her husband, Victor Mark, were convicted of multiple child sexual offense charges. The case involved abuse that took place years earlier, and both defendants had denied the allegations before a jury found them guilty. Fithian was sentenced to 8 years in prison, while Mark received a longer sentence of 14 years. What made the case especially grim was the gap between the public image and the reality described in court. Fithian was not a global movie star, but the Marvel connection made her conviction travel fast. Headlines quickly moved from her small role in Doctor Strange to the crimes that ended her public career. There was no way to separate the actress from the conviction after that. Zara Fithian's name became tied not to stunt work, martial arts, or a Hollywood breakthrough, but to a prison sentence, and a case that showed how a small piece of fame can make a serious crime echo much louder. Amy Locane. Amy Locane had the kind of early career that could have kept going for years. She appeared opposite Johnny Depp in Cry Baby, then became known to television viewers through the first season of Melrose Place. In the early 1990s, she looked like another young actress moving steadily through Hollywood. The case that changed everything happened in New Jersey in 2010. After drinking, Locane drove and crashed into another vehicle, killing 60-year-old Helene Seaman and seriously injuring Seaman's husband, Fred. Her blood alcohol level was reported at nearly 3 times the legal limit. This was not a private mistake that stayed hidden. It became a criminal case with a grieving family at the center of it. The hardest part of this story is that one reckless decision left another family permanently broken. In 2012, Locane was convicted of vehicular homicide and assault by auto. She first received a 3-year prison sentence and was released on parole in 2015. But the case did not end there. Courts later ruled that the original sentence was too lenient, and in 2020 she was resentenced to 8 years in state prison. Locane was released in December 2024 after serving her second prison term. Her acting career never recovered in any real way. Amy Locane's story remains a blunt reminder that fame cannot undo the damage caused by driving drunk. Jared Fogle. Jared Fogle was not an actor or a singer, but for years he was more recognizable than many celebrities. Subway built an entire advertising image around him. The ordinary guy who lost a huge amount of weight, smiled for the cameras, and became the face of a family-friendly brand. He appeared in commercials, charity events, interviews, and even comedy references. America knew him as the Subway guy. In 2015, federal investigators exposed a criminal case that destroyed everything attached to his name. Fogle pleaded guilty to charges involving child sexual abuse material and illegal conduct with minors. Subway immediately cut ties with him, and the clean public image that had been sold for more than a decade collapsed almost overnight. This was not a normal celebrity scandal. It was a complete betrayal of the trust his image depended on. Fogle was sentenced to more than 15 years in federal prison. The case also revealed how far the truth had been from the harmless public character people thought they knew. What makes Jared Fogle's fall so disturbing is not just the crime, it is the contrast. For years, he was marketed as safe, friendly, and inspirational. Then the court case revealed something entirely different. His name became a permanent warning about how public image can hide private darkness. Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was once one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. As the co-founder of Miramax, he helped shape Oscar campaigns, launch careers, and turn independent films into cultural events. For decades, his name meant influence. Then, in 2017, that power became the center of a criminal reckoning. Multiple women came forward accusing Weinstein of sexual misconduct and abuse of power. Their accounts helped ignite the Me Too movement and forced Hollywood to confront how much silence had been protected by money fear and career pressure. The scale of the case was not just about one producer. It exposed the system that allowed him to stay powerful for so long. In 2020, Weinstein was convicted in New York and sentenced to 23 years in prison. That conviction was overturned in 2024, after New York's highest court ruled there had been trial errors. But that did not clear him. In 2022, he was separately convicted in California and sentenced to 16 years, a sentence he is still serving. His New York retrial continued afterward with a 2025 conviction on one charge and later mistrial proceedings on another unresolved charge. Harvey Weinstein's fall was not a bad headline or a career scandal. It was the collapse of a Hollywood power structure that had protected him for years.
Harvey Weinstein's case didn't just take down a producer, it rewrote how Hollywood works. And if you've only followed the headlines, the full story in 2024 and 2025 is way messier than this clip lets on. Let's lay out the full, unvarnished timeline. In 2020, he was convicted in New York and handed 23 years. Then in 2024, New York's highest court threw that conviction out over procedural errors, specifically rules around what witness testimony was allowed at trial. That decision sent shockwaves through survivor communities who saw it as a huge step backward, but he never walked free. He was already convicted separately in California in 2022, serving a 16-year sentence that no appeal had touched. Then in 2025, his New York retrial wrapped with a conviction on one count with other charges still left unresolved. So where we stand right now, it's complicated. He's locked up in California. The New York legal fight isn't fully over. There's no clean, simple ending here. The clip says his fall was the collapse of a Hollywood power structure, and that's exactly right. But the biggest, hardest question still doesn't have a good answer. How many other powerful people in that town knew exactly what he was doing for decades and looked the other way to protect their own careers, their own access, their own paychecks? The Me Too movement his case ignited was never just about one man. It was about the whole system of silence that powerful industries build to shield their most valuable players. Weinstein was the most visible face of that system, but that system was built by hundreds of people over decades, and taking down one man, it didn't tear the whole thing down, not even close.
Todd Chrisley. Todd Chrisley built his fame by selling America a picture of wealth control and family perfection. On Chrisley Knows Best, he played the sharp-tongued patriarch with expensive taste, strict rules, and a lifestyle that looked polished for television. The show made his family famous, but the image did not survive what federal prosecutors later uncovered. In 2022, Todd and his wife, Julie Chrisley, were convicted in a federal fraud and tax case. Prosecutors said they used false documents to obtain millions of dollars in loans, then worked to hide income from the IRS. For a reality star whose brand was built on luxury, the charges cut straight through the image. The scandal was not just about money, it was about the gap between the life being sold on television and the truth being argued in court. Todd was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Julie received 7. Their show had already turned family drama into entertainment, but this was no longer a scripted argument in a mansion. It was a federal conviction with real prison time attached. In May 2025, Donald Trump granted both Todd and Julie Chrisley full pardons, and they were released from prison. That changed their legal future, but it did not erase the case from public memory. Todd Chrisley's fall remains a reality TV story turned federal fraud case, proof that a polished image can collapse fast when the paperwork tells a different story.
The Chrisley case, it has the biggest, most game-changing update of any story on this list since this clip was made. And we can't skip over it. Todd and Julie Chrisley were convicted back in 2022 on federal fraud and tax charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors laid out years of fake documents, fraudulent loan applications, deliberate tax evasion, all of it well documented. Todd got 12 years, Julie got 7. Then in May 2025, President Donald Trump granted both of them full, unconditional pardons. They walked out of federal prison that same day. I'm not here to tell you how to feel about that politically, but I am gonna say what this actually means for the story. Here's the thing about that pardon, though. It erases the legal punishment. It doesn't undo the fraud. Doesn't pay back the banks, doesn't change the facts a jury already found to be true. The harm doesn't disappear just because a piece of paper says the sentence is over. And there's another angle the clip totally ignores: how reality TV itself made this fraud easier. Chrisley Knows Best was built around flaunting wealth, mansions, cars, designer clothes, endless luxury. That constant, public display of wealth made their fake loan applications way more believable. The TV show wasn't separate from the crime, it was marketing for it. The lifestyle content and the financial scam, two sides of the exact same coin.
Julie Chrisley. Julie Chrisley was not just the wife standing beside Todd Chrisley on Chrisley Knows Best. On television, she was presented as the calmer half of the family brand, a mother homemaker and reality TV personality living inside a carefully polished world of Southern wealth. The federal case stripped that TV personality living inside a carefully polished world of Southern image down fast. In 2022, Julie and Todd Chrisley were convicted in a fraud and tax case involving bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and tax offenses. Prosecutors said the couple used false documents to obtain large loans and then worked to hide income from the IRS. For a show built around luxury, the conviction turned the lifestyle itself into evidence of a much darker story. Julie's role made this case hit differently because the public had been sold a picture of family stability, while prosecutors described a financial scheme. She was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison while Todd received 12. Their legal team continued fighting the case, and their daughter Savannah became one of their loudest public defenders. In May 2025, President Donald Trump granted both Todd and Julie Chrisley full pardons, and they were released from prison. The pardon changed their legal status, but it did not erase the scandal. Julie Chrisley's name is now tied to one of reality television's most public fraud cases, a reminder that the life shown on camera can be very different from the one proven in court. Joseph Son. Joseph Son's Hollywood connection was small, but people still remember it because of what came later. He played Random Task in Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, a strange henchman role that could have remained a minor piece of comedy trivia. Instead, his name became tied to a violent criminal case that had been unsolved for years. The case began long before his arrest. In 1990, a woman in California was attacked, and the investigation went cold. Years later, after Son was arrested in a separate vandalism case, authorities collected his DNA. That sample linked him to the old case, and the quiet Hollywood footnote suddenly became a criminal defendant. What makes this story so disturbing is how a small legal case opened the door to something much larger. In 2011, Son was convicted of torture and sentenced to life in prison. The original sexual assault charges could not move forward because of statute of limitations issues, but the torture conviction carried enormous consequences. His time behind bars only added another dark chapter. Soon after entering prison, Son was involved in the death of his cellmate and was later convicted of voluntary manslaughter, receiving an additional sentence. Joseph Son's career was never big, but his crimes made his name impossible to forget. Not because of fame, because of the damage attached to it. Shah. Jen Shah's arrest turned one of Bravo's loudest personalities into the center of a federal fraud case. On The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, she was known for designer clothes, expensive parties, assistants, and a lifestyle that looked almost too big to be real. In 2021, federal agents made it clear there was a much darker story behind the image. Shah was arrested in connection with a nationwide telemarketing fraud scheme. Prosecutors said the operation targeted vulnerable people, including elderly victims, by selling fake or worthless business services. At first, Shah denied the charges and kept fighting the case publicly. But in 2022, she changed her plea and admitted guilt to conspiracy to commit wire fraud. What made the case hit harder was the contrast between the luxury shown on camera and the victims described in court. In January 2023, Shah was sentenced to 78 months in federal prison. She was also ordered to forfeit millions and pay restitution. The fame that once made her larger than life did not help her in court. It only made the downfall easier for the public to follow. By late 2025, Shah had been moved from federal prison to community confinement to finish the remainder of her sentence. The designer labels and reality TV drama faded. What remained was a criminal case built around fraud, real victims, and a public image that no longer matched the truth.
Jen Shah's story belongs right next to the Chrisleys. Put them side by side and they lay bare a pattern in reality TV that no one talks about enough. Both built their entire brand on projecting extreme, unapologetic wealth. Both used that projected wealth directly or indirectly to help pull off financial crimes. And in both cases, the real victims got way less attention than the famous person at the center of the scandal. In Shah's case, the victims were elderly people. Prosecutors laid out a years-long telemarketing scheme that specifically targeted vulnerable, older people, selling them fake or worthless business services that drained their savings. She got 78 months in federal prison, ordered to pay back millions in forfeiture and restitution. The contrast between her on-camera designer wardrobe and the victims who testified in court, it was staggering. I keep coming back to this. The Real Housewives franchise alone has had an almost unbelievable number of cast members tied to major financial crimes. Teresa Giudice, the whole Tom Girardi mess tied to Erica Jane. The Chrisleys ran in that same adjacent world, now Jen Shah. At a certain point, this stops being a string of bad luck and starts being a question. What kind of person does a platform like that attract? When you're rewarded nonstop for performing extreme wealth, whether you actually have it or not, you're gonna draw people who already know how to sell a fake version of their life. Reality TV didn't make these people commit fraud. But it created a space where performing fake success was so celebrated, so unchecked that it became the perfect disguise for people who were already scamming. That's not a few bad apples, that's a structural problem.
Josh Duggar. Josh Duggar's public image was built on family values. For years, he appeared on TLC's 19 Kids and Counting, a reality show that presented the Duggar family as strict, religious, wholesome, and unusually close. That image helped make him recognizable to millions of viewers. It also made the criminal case against him hit much harder. In 2021, Duggar was arrested on federal charges connected to child sexual abuse material. He pleaded not guilty, but a jury convicted him later that year. The case destroyed what was left of his public reputation and added another dark chapter to a family already surrounded by controversy. The disturbing part was not just the conviction. It was the distance between the image viewers were sold and the evidence presented in court. In 2022, Duggar was sentenced to 151 months in federal prison, which is more than 12 years. His attempts to challenge the conviction have continued, but courts have rejected major parts of his appeals. Recent reports also list his projected release date as February 2033. There is no clean way to rebrand a case like this. Josh Duggar was once part of a television empire built around morality and family. Now his name is tied to a federal conviction, a long prison sentence, and a collapse that made the old TV image impossible to take seriously. Danny Masterson. Danny Masterson spent years being remembered as Stephen Hyde from that 70s show. The role gave him a permanent place in sitcom history, and for a long time that was the image many fans carried sarcastic cool and part of a cast people still felt nostalgic about. In 2023, Masterson was convicted of raping 2 women in incidents from 2003. A Los Angeles judge sentenced him to 30 years to life in prison, a punishment that turned a former sitcom star into one of the most high-profile convictions of the #MeToo era. He has maintained his innocence and pursued legal challenges, but the sentence remains the defining fact of his life now. The case also drew attention because of Masterson's connection to the Church of Scientology. Prosecutors and accusers raised questions about pressure, silence, and why the case took years to reach accountability. That made the trial feel bigger than one actor. It exposed how fame, loyalty, and powerful institutions can make justice harder to reach. For his former co-stars and fans, there was no easy way to separate the old TV image from the court record. Danny Masterson's name now carries a different weight. Not sitcom nostalgia, but a conviction that permanently changed how his career is remembered.
Danny Masterson's case, it has the biggest, most unresolved question hanging over it of any story here. And that question is all about Scientology. 30 years to life for the rape of 2 women, both attacks dating back to 2003. The crimes happened more than 20 years before a jury finally found him guilty. And the question everyone asked during the trial, one prosecutors and accusers both raised explicitly, was why did it take so long? The answer that came out in testimony and surrounding reporting points straight to the Church of Scientology. Accusers said the church pressured them for years to handle the allegations internally, to never go to outside police. You don't have to buy every single part of that account to recognize this. A 20-year gap between violent crimes and a conviction demands an explanation. And the explanation offered involves one of the most powerful, most litigious organizations in the country. That's not a side note, that's the core of the case. It's not just did he do it, the jury answered that clearly. It's what systems stood in the way for 2 full decades. What pressures, what loyalties, what threats kept these women from being heard for so long? And what does that tell us about any institution, religious, corporate, entertainment, that will protect its own powerful members before it protects vulnerable people? That 70s show has been pulled from most easy streaming access since the conviction. Most of his former co-stars have said nothing publicly. Masterson still says he's innocent, and he's still fighting the conviction through appeals. But 30 years to life is the reality right now. It's the weight his name will carry forever. 22 names, 22 faces you knew from your screen, and behind almost every single one, a huge, uncrossable gap between who they pretended to be and who they actually were. If there's one thread tying every single one of these stories together, it's this: fame doesn't reveal who someone really is, it hides them, it wraps them in a public image that acts like armor, makes accusations harder to believe, makes investigations move slower, makes accountability that much harder to reach. The bigger the platform, usually the thicker the armor, but there's something else we have to say before we wrap. In almost every case on this list, there are real victims, people whose names we barely mentioned today, the families left behind after murder. Survivors of abuse who waited decades to be heard, elderly people who lost every dollar they saved to a scam. Those people are the real heart of every single one of these stories. The celebrities, they're just the reason the stories made the news. The question I want you to sit with is this: when do we as an audience stop accepting the fun, simplified version of these stories? When do we start asking harder questions about the systems, the industries, the institutions that let so many of these situations go on for so long? Drop your answer in the comments right now. A, fame actively protects criminals by making them harder to hold accountable. B, these are isolated cases and fame had nothing to do with enabling the crimes. C, the real problem is the industries, Hollywood, reality TV, and streaming, not the individuals. D, we need to talk more about the victims and less about the celebrities in these stories. I read every comment, get in there. If this video gave you something to think about, if it went deeper than just a list of names, hit that like button and subscribe to Janine Reacts. This is what we do here, we go beneath the headline.